Today's canning question is regarding jar size and processing time, and if you can adapt the time according to the size of jar that you have. My name is Sharon Peterson. I am with simplycanning.com, where you can find home canning tutorials, tips, and online canning classes. Join me there and I will help you get your pantry filled. So today's canning chat has to do with processing times and the question of, can you change the time according to the size jar that you're actually using? So when the USDA is testing, or did the testing on processing times and foods and water bath and pressure canner, there's a lot of different things that they're checking. They're checking the thickness of your product, the food. They're checking, whether it's high acid or low acid levels and what kind of pressure would be needed for that particular food type. They're checking the jar size, what kind of heat is needed to make sure that the heat penetrates fully through to the center of the jar so that all of the food gets to the right temperature. There's all kinds of things that they check. So it's not just as simple as, I have a bigger jar, I'll just double the time. It's not that simple, so I don't recommend you doing that. For example, here's one example. Pickled peppers. I have 2 jars of pickled peppers here. There are tested recipes for either this smaller 1/4 pint jar or this pint-sized jar. As far as I know, there are no tested recipes for quart-sized jars. Maybe you use a lot of pickled peppers and you think, oh, I'm just gonna put it in a quart jar, it'll save space, and I'll just have less work to do it that way. But it's not as simple as just doubling the time to go up a size, okay? So don't do that. You're better off just doing 2 pint-sized jars. You're safe, you know that your product is gonna be good, and that's the way to go. What you can do is, if you want to go with a smaller size jar than a tested recipe calls for, then that's okay, because you'll actually be processing it maybe more than it needs, but you'll be processing it for long enough. So my example for that one is applesauce. Now this is a pint-sized jar of applesauce. There are also tested recipes for quart-sized jars of applesauce. I just don't happen to have any right now. But as far as I know, there's no tested recipes for this smaller size. If you wanted to make a smaller size jar of applesauce, you would just use the pint-sized jar, processing time for a smaller jar, and that's gonna be fine. Now for applesauce, that would work great. Maybe you wanna make some little individual size. That would actually be really handy. Some little individual size applesauce, little jars. Applesauce will hold up to that. There's some foods that if you over process it, it's gonna be really mushy and it might not be as appealing. For example, I can think of some vegetables like green beans. When you process green beans, they're pretty well cooked. So there's pint-size processing directions for green beans, but there's no smaller as far as I know. But don't just cut the time in half to make your smaller jar. You need to process it for the full time. I don't recommend it because your green beans are gonna be a little overcooked. So it kind of depends on the product that you're doing, whether it's gonna hold up to that over processing time or not. But don't just cut the time in half. So in conclusion, if you have a jar that is larger than your tested recipe, you cannot just double your time. Use the proper size jar for the tested recipe. If you have a jar that is smaller than your tested recipe, use the tested recipe time, and then just keep in mind your food type, whether it's gonna hold up for that extra processing or not. So I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. Come see me at simplycanning.com. You guys have a great day and happy canning.